Good afternoon, lovely audience. We have a galaxy of 3 speakers.
Yes.
And our topic today is rebuilding organizations from hierarchies to networks, which is really fascinating. I would like to squeeze the maximum out of this 45 minutes that we have, because we have some very interesting thoughts. I'm sure we'll have some very interesting thoughts from the speakers. Of hierarchies to networks is really fascinating. A few years back, we talked about tall hierarchies being replaced by flat hierarchies. But we didn't talk so much about networked organizations and networked hierarchies. Today, we're going to this afternoon explore the different facets of how a network can work in an organization. So one of the questions that we're going to examine is certainly, is it old wine? Does it encourage innovation? Does it encourage experimentation? And for old organizations which are traditional like Tata Steel, how does it work? How does it play out? Let me start with Nikhil. Nikhil, can you please tell us about how you sculpt appropriate organization structure for Industry 4.0? When I grew up, we were still in Industry 1.0. And as things went by, we talked more and more about flatter structures. But how does it work in Industry 4.0? Please go ahead.
All right, a great question to start with. Thank you very much for the introductions as well, Mr. Sriram. First of all, let's just define what is Industry 4.0 for the audience, right? It's the next step in the evolution of manufacturing. It's based on the idea that machines should be able to communicate with each other and work together to create new products and services. Now, this 4.0, so-called Industry 4.0, actually uses technologies like AI, robotics, augmented reality, big data analytics, and so on. And across industries today, we have quite a few examples to cite of organizations that are actually there already as we speak. In aviation, I believe Boeing has been an early adopter. In FMCG beverages, for example, Carlsberg has been making some waves of late. In automotive, it's Volvo that's been doing some great work there, I reckon. Now, I would in particular like to talk about Hire, the appliances company. And I think they're a great example of what Industry 4.0 is all about. Hire Appliances is a great example of a company that's not just using Industry 4.0, but they're also moving to a very interesting org structure. Now, the refrigerator factory, for example, in Shenyang, in China, was recently chosen by the World Economic Forum as the top 18 lighthouse factories. Now, it's called lighthouse because it's a symbolic representation of leadership in the space of Industry 4.0. But Hire's factories are all connected and they talk to each other. This ergo calls for an org structure as well that can be truly supportive of this interconnectedness that the technology has been providing them across the board. So, what's happening here is Hire's got this revolutionary model called the Renden-Hay organization model. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but it's actually a combination of employees and users and consumers. So it's the coming together of people and the users together. And I think it's been producing some astounding results for the organization. And the model essentially empowers staff and it gives them a huge amount of freedom and autonomy. And it was developed by the CEO of Hire. I think his name is Zhang Rumin. And I think no other company today operates this way. And at this scale, particularly, the entire structure democratizes decision-making, going from traditional pyramid structure to a very, very flat structure. But that's not all. The org structure here actually transcends the organization. And it also connects vendors, suppliers, and even users and consumers. And it's actually a microcosm of people coming together and creating products that are the CEO has gone on air to say We want to use big data to create small data. We want to customize products to people, and and that's where Industry 4.0 and the structure of networks is really helping them. But I think the message.
So are you saying that, Nikhil, that nobody reports to nobody or anybody, and that there is no issues of span of control and chain of command and reporting and stuff like that? Good old principles of management.
Yeah, and when you study them, I think they're almost like micro enterprises, and they have full autonomy in decision making, including their overall strategy, hiring, remuneration decisions. And I think it requires a whole amount of trust. It requires a whole amount of culture. I believe culture is one of those really important catalysts in getting these networks to really work in the organization, because they're not going to work by themselves, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a thought in the head, but how do you actually mobilize that? How do you make people really show up differently at the workplace to use these networks to the fullest? So and they're still evolving. I mean, there's no one formula here in how to create a networked organization, but I think these are some examples. They are happening in nooks and corners of the world, and I think it's a change that is inevitable for all of us.
I believe, Faridun, that in the British Army, they use Agile, and one would get the impression that the army is a very hierarchical kind of a structure. And imagine having squads and tribes and guilds and chapters in the army. Unimaginable, at least if one looks at the experiment that was done in Spotify. Of course, Spotify has moved on now to trios and alliances and stuff. But tell us a little bit about, in your consulting experience, how it has been to get that discipline of proper performance appraisals. When I say proper, I mean fulfilling for the employee, promotions. How do HR systems work? How is manpower fungible in an organization structure like that? Any ideas to be taken from Spotify? How do people forgive mistakes? How do you create a new culture? Mic is yours.
Sure. So before I get specifically to that, just one or 2 points I think to reiterate, right? Which is that organizations have been experimenting with different ways of working for many years. So it's not a new thing. The problem is that if you think about a computer in the 1960s, it would have taken up this whole room that I'm sitting in. An iPhone that I have today has more computing power than that. But if you looked at an org structure chart from the 60s and today, it pretty much looks the same. Why over the last 10 to 12 years, people have figured out that this way of organization, which is fundamentally the Industrial Revolution's answer to organization, doesn't work anymore. Now, as far back as the 50s, organizations were experimenting with different ways of working. For example, there's an organization called 𝗔𝗲𝗃, which is a network of nurses that currently has 12,000 people and no hierarchy. And they work, as Nikhil said, in self-organizing teams. In the early 2000s or in the 2000s, you had all the people you normally would think of as working in this new way coming up, like Spotify and Google and Netflix and Amazon. But the last 5 or 6 years has been a tipping point where it's become much more mainstream. So 7 out of the 10 most valuable companies in the world today are organized in some way or other in non-traditional methods. Now, of course, many of those elements, as we've spoken about, are flat structures, cross-functional platforms, which are end-to-end empowered to deliver. They run in a specific way. To the specific question on how do you measure and how do you get the whole system together, a couple of thoughts. Number one, this, when done well, is actually far more discipline than the original hierarchical way of working. So the amount of discipline that is needed, so it's not that anyone can just do whatever the hell they want. The amount of discipline that is needed is intense. That's number one. Number two, the level of transparency dramatically increases. And by that, the performance pressure actually increases because you're almost looking at things on a daily basis. So there's much more transparency, which, by the way, is not actually very comfortable for many people. So you can't say that, you know what, I'm going to put this project together, which will happen in January. And then by January, everyone's forgotten about it and no one really knows when it's going to happen. There is no hiding. And 2 or 3 points in terms of performance management. Number one is people working towards the same outcome need to have the same goals. So if we're working on a project towards something and you're in charge of procurement and I'm in charge of sales, we can't have goals that oppose each other. So you have a lot of shared goals. Everyone has the same goal in that particular sphere. That's number one. Number two is to Nikhil's point on culture, you need to introduce elements of culture into your performance management. So people are measured on the behaviors that they actually kind of demonstrate. So you actually have to measure them. And the third is you need to build a lot of functional expertise. So over time, you start measuring that as well. HR's role becomes crucial because of a couple of things. One is the performance management system. And over time, in very mature organizations, to your point, the fungibility of people, which is just as capital needs to be reallocated. How efficiently can we reallocate people on a quarterly basis? So let me just stop there.
Atrayee, these 28 squads that you have in Tata Steel, which is, I think, an organization which is almost 150 years old. And compared to the tech organizations, is more traditional, perhaps in culture, has always had hierarchies, like a brick and mortar company. And I'm used to one. I'm working with Larsen & Toubro. We have our hierarchy and we think it works for us. So how has this transformation been? It must have been a massive, massive shift. How was it taken by the leadership? And what was the HR role in making this whole thing happen?
Thank you, Mr. Sriram, firstly, for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and secondly, for the question. It's where the rubber hits the road. Okay, so what Nikhil is saying and Faridun is saying, well researched, well understood about what's happening in the world. For us, it was about assimilating how does it happen in Tata Steel. And of course, McKinsey has been a part of that journey, a very critical part of the journey. It's not easy. Okay, so much as I would like to say that, we have a team of 32,000 people and everybody would be equal, people still, when we recruit them, say that my aspiration is to become a CEO in so and so years. So hierarchy is what drives them. Hierarchy is what's their motivation, and they feel that those are the milestones of success. So till the society at large redefines success, there's no running away from hierarchy. So that's the starting point. Having said that, we always had the feedback, and we know it ourselves through introspection, that a large organization and an old organization has the risk of becoming slow. But Tata Steel is 20 organizations built into one. It's a mining company, it's an engineering company, it's a procurement company, and it's a business and materials company. So the challenge was, how is it that you inject agility in a manner that doesn't disturb the apple cart and yet transform it over a period of time? So as we went along, we decided on three things. First was agility, and we all used to think in the beginning, oh God, agility means like I just have to act fast. And we never really understood what it meant. And we did go and see people in Spotify and all other, many others, including the old companies and the service companies and all of them in various parts of the globe. And that was an eye-opener to start with. The second thing we did was we started with the behavior of leadership. And we said agility of self is the first thing. Then we came to the agility of processes and the agility of structure. So this is the journey of agility in three parts. So it's not like many Tata Steel people must be thinking and attending this and saying that, but where is agility of structure happened? So, it's a journey. It happens over a period of time. But agility of self is something which is so important in showing you the mirror. And it had a structure to it. It is not like, come on, go and introspect how agile you are. The structure was debated as to what are the behaviors which will drive agile in the company, and we identified 4 behaviors. We started right from the top saying that if leadership doesn't display it, nobody else can. And that was the beginning. And if it does not matter in the financial take home that you have, then it will never come to life. That was the toughest to actually decide on, but we decided that. It's been 1.5 years now, and it's running. In terms of the behavior mapping, terms of affecting our variable bonuses and also giving us inputs as to how to change. Many people have a blind spot and they don't know how to change. So agility of self was the first thing, followed by the process changes which were required, which probably in your next question, Mr. Shriram, I can address it. But it meant that, you cannot inject something from the outside till you change the processes, till HR becomes agile, till procurement becomes agile, till your bureaucratic systems go away, you can't become agile. So there was a structure of bureaucracy busters which has come in, where 85 odd simple things which we continue to do because it has always been done, and we did away with it, and we continue to do seasons of bureaucracy busters, so that slowly all those unnecessary tasks get completely washed away from the system. The last is the structure, which you mentioned about the agility through structure. The 28 projects actually get done by a tribe which identifies that what's going to be our kill. And we're going to all share the kill that we go for. And we're going to define each day who goes in which journey for the kill. And we report back in the morning that I went to so-and-so jungle and I didn't find anything, but tomorrow I'll be able to do something. So I'm just giving a loose metaphor of how, to go for your hunting grounds. That is exactly how the tribes behave. They are long-term projects which were nice to do, very important for the company, but somehow not getting done at the pace that we wanted. Slowly, if the 28 projects get done, bureaucracy busters happen, and agility of self embeds itself right below, down to the organization, there will probably come a time where everybody will be able to redefine success and hierarchies will become less important. So this is the way we are spreading the networks in reality, and we hope it will work.
Wonderful first round. Nikhil, tell me, do all these initiatives have a shelf life? Sometimes, some people who are, shall we say, I won't call them skeptical, but they're a little suspicious about these initiatives. They say it's all jargon, it's nothing new, it's a flavor, it'll come and go. Any views on A, how to deal with the skepticism? And B is, genuinely, does it really have a shelf life? And so what if it has a shelf life? Even medicine has a shelf life.
So a couple of thoughts here to your question. I'm really glad you asked this, actually, because to me, when you start looking at things like Agile or OKRs, it's a great way to set goals and implement them with the kind of desire to be agile as an organization is concerned, or for that matter, creating structures to enable such systems. Now, at the end of the day, I think I asked this really rudimentary question: which employee today in which organization does not want empowerment? Which employee does not want transparency? Which employee does not want access to what the organization goals look like? Which employee does not want authentic leadership at the workplace? I think the answer is going to be pretty much none, right? And I'm not seriously concerned about nomenclatures used more than ways of working. And I think what the agile ways of working today are really bringing to the table, like Faridun and Atrayee mentioned, it's enabling a whole lot of transparency. It's enabling, focus on creating genuine value, not just for customers, but also employees. And as long as these things are getting activated and enabled, and if there's a system that's doing it for you, I think the answer is let's just go for it. Skepticism is natural. I think it's also healthy. In any new product that comes to the market or any innovation that happens, you will always have early adopters. You will have your fence sitters and you will have your laggards. And that's just the nature of us humans, right? So skepticism, I believe, is good. The only answer to that is just going to be that if we look at the pros and cons and do a little bit of benefit analysis here, I think is just bringing a very different culture to the foreground as far as companies go. It just enables people to feel like they can show up differently. And if you look at, to me, I think 3 or 4 things stand out very clearly, Mr. Shriram. One is the fact that these structures and these agile ways of working, be it OKRs, be it using squads like Spotify does, or any other things. I think the fundamentals are it enables people to become a learning organization, right? And what does that mean? It means focus is not on who made the mistake. Focus is on what do we learn from it, and how do we educate the rest of the organization on what not to do, and how quickly can you do that? That's number one. Number two, are people experimenting enough? Faridun talked about the top 10 organizations today, and one of the hallmark symbols of that these organizations are that they are all innovative organizations. When you look at companies like Netflix, you look at companies like Spotify, Atlassian, these are all organizations that have been constantly innovating, but people need to fail in order to innovate. And if your culture does not allow you to fail, then there's going to be no innovation. Then you're going to have the Nokias and the Blackberries and the Fiats of the world that are really struggling to be relevant today. And I think the last piece is psychological safety. Are people really feeling safe today to come to the workplace and work with a set of people where they don't fear sharing something that they don't agree with? And Amazon has this great culture with Jeff saying that, I might not agree with you, but I still commit. And that's the kind of culture where employees show up doing very, very amazing things. And to me, I think Agile enables all this. And if the structure supports it, then I'm all for it.
Thank you. Faridun, tell me, how does one fix accountability? In this whole thing about team accountability and team goals and team this and team that, and you work in squads and people volunteer. Sounds very nice, like a nice fairy tale. But how does one fix the accountability for performance? The shareholder at the end of the day in a listed company wants to know about what is it that you are doing for increasing productivity and how are you monitoring it?
Let me answer that at two levels. So number one is that, and I think I should have mentioned this earlier, it's not just about a culture change. Agility for the sake of agility is interesting, but that's not the answer. When applied to business situations, the purpose is to show genuine business changes, right? And organizations that really go all out for this expect or tend to be as much as 10 times faster, can achieve 20 to 30% cost reduction and almost 30% increase in net promoter scores. So there is a clear business outcome. So for example, when say you have a squad that's going after a certain outcome, there's a very clear outcome that has to be achieved, right? And that is the first measurement. So one is the system as a whole is highly measured. In fact, I would argue it's far more deeply measured than it was ever done before. And that includes all organizations. That's number one. The second then becomes, okay, fine. So as a squad, we're measured, but what about me? What if I slack off and I let you do the work? And if we all have a shared goal, how will it work? That I think happens through a combination of a couple of things. Number one, each individual or each squad member also does have very clear items that they're working on which can be measured. And to Nikhil's point, you have to increase the level of psychological safety and feedback. So the chance of people free riding slowly goes down and down and down, because you may start a cross-functional squad and that squad might be working on something. But for example, let's say I don't do a good job, then the next time Nikhil and you and others might say, we don't want you on the team. And of course, because you have 360 feedback and so on and so forth, it happens. So I think a big myth about this is that it is easy, people can do whatever they want. That is actually not true. In fact, if you look at organizations that really take it the whole way, they do organizational enterprise prioritization on a quarterly basis. So imagine the four of us were business heads in an organization. Every quarter, each of us would have to state very clearly in a memo, what are we going to achieve in the next quarter and what help do we need from the others and what resources? And if you find that what you're trying to achieve requires more resources than what you have, then something actually gets cut out. So actually the level of discipline, accountability, and transparency dramatically increases.
Thank you. And Atrayee, I have a whole lot of questions for you for Tata Steel. but you choose to elaborate as much as you want to and cut as much as you cut down whatever you want to, because it's a live, very interesting experiment. First of all, tell me, as a follow-up to what I asked Faridun to talk about, will there be some amount of burnout? Because lots of people are anxious to contribute. They may or may not have the skills. How do you match the skills for a particular project? That's the second question. The third is those 4 behaviors that you demonstrated. Sorry if I didn't hear, but please, can you, if it's not confidential, elaborate on that? We'll start with that and more questions a little later.
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the behaviors first and then come to the burnout and accountability also that Faridun was talking. So the behaviors that we identified for ourselves was collaboration, active collaboration and it talks of 4 elements that we measure under collaboration. There is responsiveness. So how fast you're able to react as well as solve, and what is your method of being responsive. Third is, how is it that you're accountable? Are you taking full ownership? Exactly what you were asking earlier. Are you taking full ownership of the job at hand and more? And the fourth one is, how are you as a team player and how are you as a people developer if you're a leader? So up to certain levels, highest levels, we talk of people development, and down below, how are you as a team player? These are the 4 behaviors that are getting measured, and this will remain because behaviors don't change overnight. We'll stay with this for some time till we bring in other behaviors that become important for the organization to move on. Having said this, I'll come to the next part of how is it that the burnout happens. So, like Faridun was saying, while we have identified 28 projects, there are certain businesses which are running fully on Agile. So you must have heard about the brand Pravesh, and we have a service and solutions business. We have new materials. We cannot wait for those businesses to scale up. We cannot wait for them to take the same number of years like Tata Steel does in any other area, so that they are not running on 1 or 2 projects to make them Agile. Their entire business, their revenue, their costs, everything runs on Agile. And therefore, the burnout out there is very high. In fact, in that organization, there is no structure. There are only 2 levels. And people who came from one business to the other found a severe pressure of what motivates me. Youngsters who joined, some of them succeeded, some of them failed. So it was an experiment which is like 2 years old, but it's done in a small satellite to see whether it works and then whether it can be moved to the mothership. So that is how we went about doing this burnout factor and there is very severe burnout. Okay, you either hit or miss. There are people who get only 1 quarter to perform or 2 quarters to perform and then they are off. So there are various aspects of this Agile journey which sees a lot of heads rolling and hands cheering, both. So it's a journey which will give you early wins and very early indicators that you don't fit into the system.
Sorry, but as a contradistinction to the point Nikhil was making about forgiving mistakes and learning from mistakes, heads rolling sounds scary. How do you balance out both?
So there is the element of development which has to go along. Therefore, people development is very, very important. You cannot let people be by themselves and then hold them accountable without guiding them as a person who's a more experienced person in the squad. You have to take feedback as much as you give back. And therefore, what he had mentioned about psychological safety, we had embedded programs on the same as to how is it that you tell people where they are, how is it that you converse and guide them, and then the heads roll. First of all, heads rolling in Tata Steel is not known at all. I mean, it doesn't happen so easily. The attrition rates are 4%. People are generally happy. But new businesses, they do not have that bandwidth. They do not have that cushion as the box one businesses. And therefore, the conversations are very, very important. The ability to do cross-functional feedback is very important.
So does the accountability and performance appraisal sit on an ERP system where you monitor
Yes.
goals, etc. And do you also match skills for a project through an ERP system?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. So leaving alone the new business, there is a larger business which is working in conjunction with the agile way of working. One is that, of course, performance management system comes at the end of the year, but how is it that you give people the opportunity to run with these projects and be a part of these projects? So we invested in an AI-based tool which actually throws up allows anybody in any hierarchy to post a project and people to add their skills like they do in LinkedIn, and the matching happens of the project and people, and it throws up that these are your best matches. And people are also allowed to raise their hands that even if I don't have experience, can you please consider me because I want an experience here. So it is working in conjunction. So there are 1,000 such projects. Out of them, maybe 6 or 7 of them are working in the agile way. The rest of them are working in the traditional method, but at least the digital platform is ready to see that you match skills with the projects as you go along, and HR's task of conducting interviews, being subjective, all that comes to an end.
And Nikhil, a couple of lines on what is the role of an agile coach or a coach while transforming from a hierarchical organization to a network, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Fantastic. And this was actually something I wanted to segue from what Atrayee just said. And it's really interesting. I think one of the things that's changing in the world of Agile is that less of feed forward, less of feedback is happening and more of feed forward is happening. So the idea is, traditional organizations worked on a 1-year performance management system. At the end of the year, you rated people, you gave them some feedback, and you sent them for a training program. And that's how organizations have survived over the years. But with Agile, the entire system is quite different and radically different at that. The Agile coach actually has the huge responsibility of taking a product vision or an organization's larger goals and enabling the team to actually bring a little bit of forest for the trees. And the diktat over there, or the philosophy over there, is let me enable people to get more successful rather than wait for them to make a mistake, then give them some feedback. But I'll tell you what, it's already too late. So feedback is, you're already behind the game, right? If you truly want to be agile, you want to be relevant, responsive to what's happening in the marketplace outside, you have very little space for feedback. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm just saying that there's more space for feed forward. And that's one of the primary roles for the Agile coach to play over here. The second big role for the coach is essentially going back and helping people focus on the outcome. I like what Faridun said earlier. I think the more and more Agile organizations or companies that use OKRs for that matter, the focus is more on outcome. All right. So if you look at a factory setup and say that, hey, you know what? Our goal is to reduce incidents and accidents in the factory site. Great. So the focus must be, how do we ensure we have 0 incidents and accidents? We're going to reward people not on the effort or the output, but the reward should be on the outcome or the result. So you can't at any stage, you can't go back and say, hey, you know what? I conducted 20 training programs this quarter. I did this, that, and the other. This is all the work that I did. Give me a good rating. It doesn't work like this. The Agile world is, what was the outcome that we wanted? The outcome was we wanted 0 incidents. We wanted 0 accidents. Great. How successful have I been in getting that outcome? And the role of the coach is really to enable people to coach them through. It's not so much skill building. It's more about helping them overcome the barriers in order to get those results that you really want to focus on. So these to me are, a couple of very, very foundational activities that the Agile coach really plays in a setup like this.
Thank you very much. Let me open it up for questions now. Sumana, are you there? And do you have any questions? Are they going to pop up?
Yes, sir, I'm there. I'll just make the announcement once again. So participants, please forward your questions. I will put forward it to the moderator.
While they are thinking about their questions, I want the 3 speakers on this panel to respond to, is it coincidental that agility rhymes with stability and ability, and also fungibility.
Yeah, so actually we wrote an article a few years ago called Agility, It Rhymes with Stability.
Ah.
And you can find it online. And it's an important point because the perception always used to be that there is stability at one end, if you can see my hand, and there is speed at the other. And that it's a continuum, right? So either I become more fast or I become more stable. But that's actually not really what it is, right? So if you look at the way we look at it, is there is stability and there is speed, but they are on two different axes. And organizations that are extremely stable and extremely fast are what we call agile organizations. Organizations that are very fast but not stable are what you might call startups, because it's a startup. You know, 5 of us are starting something, and therefore we're a startup. Very fast, not stable. If a startup does not, or a small does not build the stability over time, it will actually become slow and unstable, which is what you might call a trapped organization, right? Because you're not going to be able to get anything done. And organizations that are very legacy organizations will have a very high amount of stability and low speed. You would become what you might call bureaucratic. So you have 4 quadrants, you know, agile, startup, trapped, or not performing, and bureaucratic. So this is again a very important point, which I think in different ways, which is stability involves a stable backbone, a lot of discipline, certain ways of working. It's not just that everyone has beanbags and is playing table tennis and chilling and kind of doing whatever they want.
Great. Let's pause for any question. Sumana, are you there?
So we have one question. How can hierarchies and networks coexist in organizations? Is that the reality in this transition phase, or will both structures coexist in the future also?
Atrayee?
Exactly what we are living out every day. There are 2 structures existing together. So it's not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's like both existing. You have both the roles, and it's part of your role. It's not like you're doing something else altogether to be agile. So while you are a senior manager and your senior manager procurement, you're also a squad lead in, say, in the mining business, and to take commercial mining to a certain volume. So that was a part of your KRA, but you didn't pay attention to it because it was a long-term KRA. What you're only doing is that this hierarchy is enabling you to be a part of the network hierarchy. So in a transition system, both exist together. Very few companies have been able to make the switch of everything on Agile. And there are most companies who exist in the typical pyramidal structure. We are seeing how it goes out. There is no North Star saying that we will do away with all hierarchies. But if it matches and this, coexistence is happy coexistence, we just might run with only this. So we're not decided about it, but coexistence is not causing chaos at the moment. So we're happy about that.
Thank you. Nikhil, will you take this next one? 3 pointers to develop an agile culture in an organization.
Yes, this was asked by 𝗔𝙗 Suryavanshi. Yes.
Thank you.
So I've actually just yesterday released an article talking about 5 cultural norms that are needed for organizations to be agile, to use agile systems. And I think I'm really happy to talk about some of them. My first cultural requirement is going to be, I think, a culture of achievement orientation has to be clearly one of those big pieces that we want. Now, let's understand what do we mean by that. A culture of achievement orientation is where people actually come together and consciously focus on achieving goals. And these are not incremental goals as much as exponential goals, right? In the marketplace, leadership today is about achieving exponential growth. And that means more ideas, more innovation, and so on and so forth. And it's about breaking these goals down into smaller, easier steps. A culture of achievement orientation.
Let me interrupt there. Does it mean, Nikhil, that you forego power for influence and that you sublimate your ego. You have to be a real yogi for that, no?
True to your name, it's a great question to ask, Mr. Sriram. Yeah, and it requires, and therefore I've been also saying that, you know, for organizations to turn agile, it cannot be that we bring old leadership practices and use that and extrapolate it on an agile system of ways of working. It also means a radical shift in the way we look at leadership. Agile organizations looking at setting up the right culture also require the leadership to show up more as coaches, more as enablers, more as people mobilizers, rather than, I know everything, I am the leader, I have spent 25 years, so you better listen to me. So that mechanistic mindset needs to change. Our leadership models, the training programs we send people on or to learn leadership, those models that they learn, those models are a big question mark today, right? So that's one answer to it. So ego, yes, definitely. I mean, the more you talk about servant leadership being applicable here, the less it is. So that's one cultural norm that I would speak of. The other cultural norm is what I will, concur with what Atrayee is saying, is that of collaboration, true collaboration, right? We actually ran an OKR program for a client. And one of the things we saw was they were struggling with implementing OKRs. And when we went back to see what were their competency definitions in the HR system, collaboration did not feature anywhere as a core competency, a behavioral competency. Now, how on earth are you going to, reinstate any of those behaviors when it's not even featuring in your list? So that's the second culture. I think interdependency is absolutely huge. And I think the third answer is going to be, the list is endless, but I think one of my favorites is a culture of experimentation and fail fast attitude, where you have to allow people to experiment. I mean, let's face it, Google Chrome is a great example of Sundar Pichai putting a bet on something he believed in. Now imagine what would happen if he wasn't allowed to experiment on that piece. Interestingly, it took 3 years for Pichai to actually get any form of traction on Chrome. But imagine if this is multiplied by the millions of employees in millions of organizations world over, who are given that freedom to experiment and fail fast and learn and improvise. I think this world would be a very different place.
Thank you. With Sumana's permission, one last question for Faridun.
We have a second question from Alicia Kuanar. Yes.
I know. I'm reading it out. I mean, I'm summarizing. Basically, she's saying, Faridun, that the reward rating linkage is based on lag indicators, whereas we are talking about feed forward in Agile. So how do you determine your compensation, and how do you manage your compensation in such a system?
Well, actually, at one level, you can argue that, what Atrayee also mentioned, that given that you're giving people feedback on their behaviors and you're including that in their performance appraisal, is very much a lead indicator. Because if I am today behaving accountable and innovative and experimenting, that's very much a lead indicator of what I'm going to do. That's number one. Number two is that because you're working on a quarterly basis, and you are actually setting goals or OKRs, as Nikhil would say, every quarter. You're measured every quarter. And therefore, and some organizations even have their performance management running on a quarterly basis. So that it's actually kind of very quick. Because you don't want somebody to do something today and then get recognized for it, 9 months later. It's actually much faster. But the minute you introduce how you do work, in addition to what you do, you're automatically creating a lead indicator of performance, that is.
Fantastic. Well, I think we should close now because we were given 45 minutes for this session. I must thank the speakers. You've been very, very patient and extremely articulate with your answers. Thank you very much, and for giving us a kaleidoscope of views. Thank you, CII.
So that was a great session, Mr. Sriram. Thank you for leading the session and making it so very engaging.
Thank you.
There were so many takeaways. And to join the next live session, may I request all of you to please click on the conference button on the left panel and click on the Join Now button of the coming up session. Please ensure the timing of the session before clicking. Also, meanwhile, we also encourage participants and speakers to visit our exhibition page again, clicking on the exhibition button on the left panel of your screen and experience the products and services of various organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you.